On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, Sanjoy Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, we welcome you warmly to this session of JLF Words Are Bridges. JLF Words Are Bridges celebrates the indomitable spirit, diversity, and richness of languages, Indian and international. Here we showcase an original work, the translation of the same, and give you an insight into the author's world. This series reinforces our vision to ensure the free flow of knowledge, information, and ideas. We present today Pachpan Khambe, Laal Deewaarein, Daisy Rockwell, and Mita Vashisht in conversation with Shinjini Kumar. Writer and academic Usha Priyamwada's iconic book Pachpan Khambe, Laal Deewaarein, originally published in 1961, follows the journey of a young female professor and her role as the sole provider for her family. Translated into English as 55 Pillars, Red Walls by writer and translator Daisy Rockwell, the tale poignantly unfurls the physical, mental, and social paradigms within which women lock themselves. Together with actor Mita Vashisht and Indian Novels Collective's co-founder Shinjini Kumar, Rockwell discusses this quietly intense and pathbreaking Hindi novel and the process of bringing it together in the 21st century. Daisy Rockwell is an artist and translator living in the US. Her translations from Hindi and Urdu include Bhisham Sahni's Tamas, Khadija Mastur's The Woman's Courtyard, Upendranath Ashk's Falling Walls, and Krishna Sobti's A Gujarat Here, A Gujarat There, which was awarded the Aldo and Jeanne Scaglione Prize for a translation of a literary work in 2020. The multifaceted Mita Vashisht, an alumni of the National School of Drama, has acted in numerous films, television series, web series, and in theatre, with award-winning performances in the films of Manikol, Kumar Sahni, Govind Nihalani, and also in the web series Criminal Justice. Mita has been visiting faculty to the NSD, NIFT, NID, WWI, and head of Department of Acting at the FTII. Her organization, Mandala, has designed and conducted theatre and performing arts modules for the empowerment and rehabilitation of trafficked minors at a remand home in Mumbai. As a writer concerned with the actor's craft, she also has 2 published essays. Shinjini Kumar is co-founder of Indian Novels Collective, a not-for-profit collective to promote Indian storytelling in translations. After 3 decades in senior positions in banking, Shinjini is now co-founder of Salt, My Salt app, a fintech platform for women. She writes short fiction, and her stories have been published in a Journal of Indian Literature, The Beacon Magazine, Out of Print Magazine, and others. We now present Pachpan Khambe, Laal Deewaarein, Daisy Rockwell, and Mita Vashisht in conversation with Shinjini Kumar.
Hey, good evening, Daisy, Mita. Welcome to this conversation. I've been really looking forward to talking to both of you together about this really precious book. And I'm just going to take a very small, short time to talk a little bit about my own intimacy with this book, because I was a teenager when I read it. And, I was one of those slightly intellectual kids who was very proud of the fact that I read a lot. And then I read this book, and it was such a simple book that I was almost tempted to not take it very seriously, because I used to read more, the sort of serious type of book. But then when I ended the book, it just left me with this very, very strong, empty feeling. And I will never forget that emotion that book left me with. And therefore, I have always gone back to this book to try and understand why does it leave you with that. And it's not just about the end, and we will come and talk more about the end. But I wanted to first ask both of you about your introduction to this book, and what emotion did it evoke in you when you read it or heard about it or went through it for the first time. Daisy, you may want to start.
Me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had read it a long time ago when my Hindi wasn't very good. And so then I revisited it when Rakshanda Jalil, the Urdu translator and critic, was putting together a kind of a volume of writings about the city of Delhi and different writings that evoked the atmosphere of Delhi. And she was an alumna of Lady Shri Ram College, and she recalled that this book really evoked the atmosphere of the architecture and the atmosphere. So she asked me if I could do a passage for the collection, and so I quickly went through and found a passage, and that's the passage that I'll be reading a little bit later. But then I said, oh, I have to read this book. It was just, the prose was so beautiful and clear. And so I started from the beginning again, and I just sort of whipped through it. I think the way that people read it very fast. And yes, you're left with a feeling of emptiness, but also beauty, the beautiful beauty of the writing and the imagery and so on. It's a very beautiful little book. Although I know a lot of people feel depressed when they finished it. One friend who read the translation, he read it in a night, and then he said, "I'm gutted." The people keep saying that to me.
You know what you're saying, for me it was that beauty of that a very summer evening somehow, that North Indian summer evening, the yellow flowers. It's got that feeling of somehow it's a very evocative book. And yeah. I wanted to ask Mita, because I'm sure she lived with this book for a very long time. I'm sure you have lived with this book for a very long time. So Mita, just tell us a little bit about what was it like living with this book and this character, because you really brought it alive.
Thank you. Actually, it's strange. I know it sounds crazy, but it's almost like I intuited the book, because when the director, who was Mr. P.K. Mohanty, when he called me, and I was in Bombay, and obviously this was 30 years ago, so I was very young. And he just told me that there's this story, and I actually hadn't read the book, and I didn't know about it. I didn't realize it was such a great Hindi classic at that time. So when I went for the shooting, he gave me the script, which has a lot of the dialogue. A lot of it is culled from the novel. And some descriptive passages are given as dialogue to certain characters. But he just told me 2-3 things. And one of them he said was, she's a very strong person, but she's very introverted. She's very to the point of being shy. And when she hears criticism, it almost like it sort of makes her almost go into a paralysis of kind of shock, And he said she has a great sense of self-esteem, of dignity, but at the same time, she's very vulnerable to what the world thinks about her. And, so I don't know what it was. Whether it was the age. And of course, I've lived in Delhi a lot. And something about Delhi, in some strange way, it's very odd that we should be talking about Delhi architecture and all, because as a very young actress, I'd grown up in Delhi a lot and in the north of India. And when you come to Bombay, there's kind of rhythm of the city which completely hijacks your own thought processes. So every time I had to do a major film, and all my films, I would actually run away to Delhi about 15 days before a shoot and just sit there and walk and look at the trees and walk around in Asiat Village or Lodi Gardens or whatever. It's almost like I would absorb the city in me and then come back to Bombay and feel I can now tackle anything. So in some strange way, when I was doing the character of Sushma, it was strange, but I remember as actually evoking inside me the architectural spaces. So if I lay on the bed, it wasn't just a bed, it was a space for her body to sort of unfurl, in some ways. If she lay on the grass, it wasn't that she just lay on the grass as the director shot. It's almost like she becomes, she inhales the fragrance and she breathes in everything that's like a tiny bit of glass. She'll, watch at some insect walking in the grass. So it's almost like, for me, Sushma, because she was so introverted, her world was one of extreme sensuousness, towards nature, towards flowers, towards color, towards everything. And it's very strange because I hadn't actually read the book, you know. And when we finished shooting and it got aired almost immediately, I remember having a lot of fights with the director, though. Imagine, he had cast me, but there were times he would push me towards playing Sushma in a certain way, and I would just put my foot down and say, no, she's not like that. You know?
And yeah.
And he was so mad at me because there's particularly one, and he wanted it slightly over the top. He wanted this emotionalism to come through. And I said, no, you told me the first day that she's very introverted and she's like this. There was a time when there was a particular scene towards the end of the book when she's actually making a speech at a college function, and she sort of can't stop thinking that Neil is leaving now. And he wanted it like, you know, tears flowing and her like all that. And I'm like, no. And he got so mad at me. He said, I'm the director and you don't know what I want. And I said, no, I know what you want. So I told the cameraman, switch off the camera, don't record this. And then I gave him what he wanted. I gave him the tears and the drama and everything. And I said, this is what you want? And he said, yes, yes, this is what I want. And I said, this is exactly what I'm not going to do.
You know?
And he was so mad at me that he went out. And I told the cameraman, okay, now, and you know, this was really chutzpah on my part because I was just about 29 or 30 years of age. I had done about 5 films, but I was so sure that this is the way Sushma has to be played and no other way. I just, you know, after some time, something happens inside you. So I just said, then I told the cameraman, should we just roll and record the scene? And we did it like that without the director, you know. And later on, of course, he said, there's Mita Vashisht, Mita Vashisht, she's Orissa, you know, she's mad, but she's brilliant, but she's mad, so talented, but so mad, you know. But I don't know, with Sushma, after some time, I just felt that there's a way she will speak, the way she will breathe, a way she will just feel energy draining away from her or entering her. And, you know, so for me, it was very strange, but it was like, I kind of intuited the book and I only read it much later. And then suddenly one day when I was walking the streets in Bangalore, I was mobbed by a bunch of school young college girls. And they said, you're coming in Pachpan Khambe, Laal Deewaarein, you're the actress and all. And they were, you know, Bangalore, you know, Daisy is a non-Hindi speaking place, especially at that time. You know, people didn't speak Hindi, they didn't understand it very well. But something about the serial and the story and the character and everything had just got to them so strongly that they just mobbed me in a very joyous way and they just wouldn't let me go. And I was like, Bangalore, South India, where they don't speak Hindi and they're going mad with this serial. So something about it just completely caught the imagination and the emotional, you know, it just anchored itself into people's deep heart space.
I actually want to start out by thanking Daisy for picking this book up for translation, because in Indian Novels Collective, when we were thinking about books to translate, this was one of the books that was top of mind for us. And, you know, Mangleshji had been very kind to also be very supportive of that idea. But we also had a bunch of young interns and others who said, oh, but how is this book like the most relevant, because can't identify with Sushma. And I'm going to ask Daisy to talk a little bit about that. But before that, I want to pick up on what Mita was saying about living Sushma. I was just looking at you, Mita, while you were talking, and I'm looking at the image behind you and the green and the bindi and the sari. And I'm just thinking, this is Sushma still. I think you were coming to talk about Sushma, and I don't know if you consciously did this, but when I was last talking to Daisy about this book, she actually made me see something very important about the book, which I hadn't seen as a lay reader, which was something that you just talked about, which is the whole shringar. In fact, Daisy uses in her translation the word rasa. She doesn't let go of that that delicacy of that you know, association that Sushma has. So Daisy, I just want you to talk a little bit about how do you think young women, for whom, you know, it's a very different context, because this is really an old book, but you are bringing it to a generation of readers for whom, you know, some things might have changed, some things might not have changed. I just want to hear your thoughts on how do you navigate that?
Well, this is what I write about in my introduction. I was very surprised when I first brought up the project. My agent brought it to a bunch of different editors, and a lot of them said, this book is too dated. And they weren't the only ones that said that. The author herself said nobody's going to be able to identify with it. It's too dated. She used the same words. I had to convince her to give me permission because she was worried about the reception. And I've also talked to other people, fellow translators, who said the same thing. And I thought, what a strange thing to say about a work of literature. Like, it's like a hemline, you know, like it's like talking about women's fashion as women's history and women's lives. Are they also something that goes out and then we just throw them to the back of the closet, like you know, a dress that's too short or too long, or a ridiculous hairstyle or something like that. And so I started to think a lot about why people would say that, and it, you know, it seems like it's because it's when I delved in with some people, they said, well, because this wouldn't happen anymore. Like and I went farther and said, what wouldn't happen? And they say, well, you know, the way that her colleagues hound her and her family hounds her, and she can't live her life of her own. Like a woman like that in Delhi now could be a single,
No,
have a whatever, you know. That's fine. I'm glad, but the point of this is a literary work, and this is a beautifully written work, and it's also a snapshot into a time in women's history. And I think that it's very strange to treat women's literature as though it's like something sociological or like immediately emancipatory or something. You read this and then you say, oh, I must get out of my situation. Like, that's not necessarily the point of literature. And I brought it up with my husband, and this is my favorite example. He said, well, if that's like saying we shouldn't read Les Miserables anymore because France doesn't have penal colonies.
Yeah.
That's over. So we don't have to worry about that problem. So I think it's really the wrong way to look at a literary narrative. And I think we should treasure, especially the writings of Usha Priyamwada. Each of her novels is kind of a snapshot into women's liberation and women's thought, and in different time periods, very beautifully wrought. And I think we should be, you know, honored to have these narratives to read.
And really, thank you for doing that again. Usha ji herself said recently that now I have a whole new generation of readers who will blame me for the ending. And I was telling Mita that, and Mita also, of course, knows her, and she had very interesting thoughts about the ending. So, and I know that you have too. So let's talk a little bit about the ending, because a lot of people get sort of, I should say, misled by the ending to think of the book in a different way. So, yeah. So, Mita, why don't you go first and tell us about, why, because what you said stayed with me. You said it's the end that actually forces you to go back in the book. And I think that has happened to me.
Yes. Years ago when this was first released, in 1993, when the serial came on air, I remember at a film festival, I was at Alliance, at a French embassy celebration of the Indian Film Festival. And there was this lady, she was from the Indian Foreign Service. She must have been around in her late 50s. To me, she seemed very old because I was just about 30. So anybody who was 50 and above seemed like old. But she was all gray haired and very, very self-assured. And she grabbed hold of me at the party and said, "You are Sushma Sharma. Why didn't you take that flight and go with me? How dare you let us down?" I said, is there more? I said, no, it's only 9 episodes. Because in the end, Daisy, in the serial, the director took a little liberty. He has actually got Neil calling Sushma over the phone and saying, "Can you just come at least once to the airport and meet me?" And she's just sitting there with the receiver, unable to move, and he just is pleading with her. So he took that liberty. In the novel, of course, I read now that Meenakshi calls a taxi for her, which she finally doesn't take and sends it back. But in the serial, he just has his voice over the phone and it's all on Sushma, and she's just, you know, not able to move. And he's cajoling her and saying, just come once. And, you know, why don't you just come? Why don't we just take this chance? And she's just sitting there with that phone in her hand. And, you know, and you can see that, you know, it's the worst choice in her life for her. It's killing her, but she's not going to go. You know, so in some strange way so this lady was so mad at me, and I told her, I said, I'm not the writer, you know, I'm not the director, it's their choice, I'm the actress. But that did happen. But in some ways, you know, I have this thing about, even today, I don't think things have really changed, honestly speaking. I have lived my life as a woman who actually is independent, earned my own, was married, divorced, everything and all that. And I feel somewhere that the fact that we are very connected to many, you know, also I realized once I was married that this business of, I thought I was this very free, liberated woman, but you scratch me below the surface and I'm just going to fall into the role of the ideal daughter-in-law. You know, it was so scary. When you're put into the ritual of a marriage and someone says, touch the feet and everything, and you were screaming and saying, no, I'm a star, I've done my own living, I'm earning more than my husband, why should I go plunging at everybody's feet? And you find that you just do it. And that is what scares the hell out of you, because you realize that the conditioning, social conditioning, which your parents may not have given you, but it exists in the air around you. You know, that is so there that you breathe it in, because the way you breathe oxygen, you know, in many ways.
So you think Sushma avoided that by not?
No, I don't think. I think Sushma actually is very real. If we, you know what, the problem that I find with feminism in India is that it forces us to give up all that makes us women. You know, the nurture, the self-nurture. We are supposed to become like men. We are supposed to compete with them. Whereas if we were told that we are actually superior in many ways, that we have a greater strength of body because we have periods and we bear the pain, you know, if we have a greater sense of being able to multitask, it needs a lot of strength to keep your emotional quotient going, your intellectual quotient going, your so many things. In some strange ways, I found personally that I had shortchanged myself by jumping into a feminism that did not emerge from my own soil. So I gave up nurture for myself. I gave up the idea that I need to be nurtured as well. I gave up the idea that I will be feminine. I don't have to dress in a certain way to compete with anyone, you know. In some ways, because we have this idea of the feminine. Like when I would read Doris Lessing, she would say, oh, that's horrible. You know, the protagonist would say that horrible smelly time of the month when you want to, douche your body with fragrances and all. And here we have this idea that you are Shakti, you're actually, you know, dying and being born, you know. It's a totally different perspective. And in some ways, I feel, without saying all that, Sushma's character actually embodies a certain strength where she is very clear about her roots, her sociological, belongings. She knows when she's being stifled. It's not that she doesn't know, which is the strength of this, which is amazing. She, of course, knows. She knows at every step that this is not what, that people are taking advantage of her, that her mother's taking advantage of her, that, you know, the systems are taking advantage of her. But at the same time, there is a certain inner strength which allows her to hold on to her own. And Usha ji and I actually discussed it. We said, you know, at the end of the day, will she actually give up this independence of a certain kind and end up with Neil and be a housewife, you know? Or, you know, of course, there are many possibilities, but I think the fact that there's this poignant choice that she makes, it makes you go right back and relook at everything and say, could she have done this? Could I do this, you know? The little thorn that it leaves in your heart actually makes you keep revisiting it, you know?
And I think sorry, go ahead.
And also I think in today's, it's very funny, but when I go to cross the colleges in Bombay, when I'm on my way to a shoot and I see this crowd, in Bombay, you know, you don't have campuses. All the students are hanging on the road because the campuses are so small. And I realized actually nothing has changed in 40 years when I was in college to today. You see the same bunch of, same uneasy sense of fashion among the college kids. You see somebody who's a star among 5 people, you see 2 loners, you see that one solitary person who's not sure of what her identity is, because the whole hopping hormone time of the college kids is still the same. The only difference is the blessed cell phone. Everyone has a cell phone. But it's peculiar how you realize that actually people are still as clumsy with fashion and themselves as we were at that age. So I wonder if the human situation really changes. The only thing today I find with a lot of young women is that they become independent financially, but they're again in the name of the idea that I'm a free person. They actually shortchange themselves in terms of love. They're very free with their bodies,
So,
the question, so that the question of the shortchanging is also what we did because we imagined we were free. So in some ways, that balance of knowing that you are a sacred, I like the fact that Sushma considers herself in many ways sacred as a person. Her emotions are sacred. She's not willing to just give them like that.
Yeah, and I was just remembering as you were speaking an example that Daisy took when she was talking about the book earlier of that instance where her sister is given her sari, and
Yes.
I wanted Daisy to come in a little bit more on the writing itself, because everything that you just said so evocatively, Mita, is actually the success of the book, right? The
Yes.
fact that she uses the right words in a very simple way
Yeah.
to bring up all of these emotions.
Yeah.
Daisy, I want you to talk a little bit more about the writing and about how she uses these little
Yes.
ornaments to bring up all of this beauty.
No,
And then I want both of you to read a little bit from the book before.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, this book is deceptively simple because, it's actually sometimes harder to write so briefly what she's saying. She's, creating, we keep talking about how evocative it is. And you spoke of the architecture and how her body lives in the architecture. And I think that it's like this tiny little jewel that contains like you feel all of Delhi when you're reading the book. And her personality, and like there's just so much that we get with this very spare prose style. It seems simple, it's short, there's not lots of hard words or lengthy descriptions, but everything is just it's like a miniature. Everything is precise and jewel-like. And a lot of my favorite moments are her shringar moments when she's like at her mirror, making herself up, choosing the bindi, and doing her hair. It's just like it gives you so much. I think what Mita was saying also about how her what did you say about her personality being so so you said something about her spirituality, and I think like that she
keeps that boundary. Yeah. You said something. Yeah.
Sacred.
Yes,
there it is. Okay. Yeah, so the sacredness of her makeup and her adornment, her shringar, is really palpable. And it's also interesting in the moments when she's depressed, how like it all looks bad, like her hair becomes dull, and she doesn't put on lipstick, and she wears a dull sari, and everything. Like she expresses herself through this process of adornment and making herself up in it. But it's always so beautifully done. Like there's not thousands of words describing this, just a few for each thing.
Yeah.
And that's how she continues to live in Mita. Like I'm looking at Mita today and I'm just thinking so much of Sushma, because I actually read the book in Hindi, then I watched the whole show. It's available on Doordarshan channel.
DD Archives.
Yes, I watched that, and then I read the English book, and it's a book that you can actually live in, because it just draws you into it. I want you to read a little bit I want both of you to read a little bit from the book, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it because, yeah. So Daisy, why don't you start with the English, with a paragraph that you want to read in English, and then I'm going to ask Mita to read the same paragraph in Hindi, and that will be fun.
Okay. So what I'm reading from, I thought I would choose that first passage that I translated for Rakshanda Jalil, about that actually gives us the meaning of the title, the 55 pillars. And then this is a moment when it's the beginning of a holiday, I mean, a vacation time. So it's at the college and all the students have gone. And Sushma's alone and packing up to go home to visit her family. And Neil surprises her with a visit, and they're sitting alone on the lawn in front of those, you know, iconic pillars of Lady Shri Ram College, which is never mentioned, by the way, in the book. You just know that that's what it is. Okay, so I'll start. What are you thinking? Neil asked softly. Nothing. I'm just looking at the pillars. How many are there? Why don't you count them yourself? Neil began to count. He counted to 55, then said, I can't count anymore in the dark. I'll finish up some other time. They fell silent. Before them, the vast building of the college with its numerous columns, a light affixed to each, its high red walls, and complete solitude. Do you like living here? Neil asked. Yes. Another long silence. You're not saying anything, he said. What else should I do? What should I say? Something about modern poetry? Picasso? No, tell me something about yourself. I don't know anything about you, other than that I like you very much. Inspired by an instinctual urge to cause herself pain and trample on her own dreams, Sushma replied, Age, 33 years. Home, poor. Hindi teacher. Is there anything else you'd like to know? Neil was taken aback by the bitterness of her tone. Sushma's eyes filled with tears like drops of dew. She looked down. Neil shifted away from her slightly. Please leave me alone, she said. Okay, I'm leaving, he said quietly. I'll not bother you again. Sushma looked away. She heard the sound of his car starting. Then perhaps he stopped by the gate, opened it, and drove away. Sushma felt overwhelmed by an unfamiliar sorrow. She gathered up her loose hair, twisted it up and tied it in a knot, then began packing her suitcase. She felt like going to sleep, or doing something at least. Somehow she'd lost all her enthusiasm for going home. Bahri was cleaning up the dishes in the kitchen and putting them away. Her diligence made Sushma feel even more irritable. She finished packing her clothes in the suitcase and then left it right in the middle of the room. She couldn't imagine how she'd make it through the next few desolate hours, how easily the time would pass if Neil were there. Sushma suppressed this thought as it was born. What has he to do with me? How does he belong to me? But at this, she felt a frisson in her arms that spread throughout her entire body. She went and fell upon the bed, where she bit her lips, buried her face in the soft pillow, and just lay motionless.
Mita, do the honors, please. Read the same paragraph for us in Hindi.
I need my specs here. क्या सोच रही है? नील ने बहुत धीरे से कहा. कुछ नहीं. खंबे देख रही हूँ. कितने खंबे हैं? आप ही गिन लीजिए. उसी तरह बैठे बैठे नील ने 55 तक गिना, फिर कहा, अब तो नहीं गिना जाता अंधेरे में, फिर गिनूंगा. फिर मौन. सामने कॉलेज की विशाल इमारत, जिसमें ढेर से खंभे थे. हर खंभे में एक बत्ती लगी थी. लंबी लाल दीवारें और निर्जनता. यहां रहना अच्छा लगता है, नील ने कहा. हाँ. फिर लंबा मौन. नील ने कहा, आप तो चुप बैठी हैं. फिर क्या करूं? क्या बात करूं? आधुनिक कविता पर, पिकासो पर? नहीं, अपने बारे में कुछ बताइए. मैं आपके बारे में कुछ नहीं जानता, सिवाय इसके कि आप मुझे बहुत अच्छी लगती हैं. अपने को पीड़ा देने की किसी अनजान भावना से प्रेरित हो अपने स्वप्नों को रौंदते हुए सुषमा ने कहा, उम्र 33 बरस, घर से गरीब, हिंदी की टीचर, कुछ और जानना चाहते? उसके कंठ की तलखी नील को खट से लगी। सुषमा की आंखों में आंसू भर आए, जैसे ओस की 2 बूंदें। उसका सिर नीचे झुक गया। नील उससे अलग हो गया और बोला, रो रही हैं आप? क्यों? उसकी ओर मुंह मोड़कर सुषमा ने कहा, प्लीज लीव मी अलोन। बहुत धीरे से नील ने कहा, अच्छा, जा रहा हूं, फिर कभी आपको तंग ना करूंगा। सुषमा ने उसकी ओर से मुंह फेर लिया। उसने कार स्टार्ट होने की आवाज सुनी, फिर गेट के पास रुककर शायद नील ने उसे खोला और चला गया। सुषमा को एक अनजानी उदासी ने घेर लिया। उसने अपने खुले बालों को इकट्ठा कर उनमें एक बल देकर गांठ बांध ली और बक्स में कपड़े रखने लगी। उसका मन हो रहा था कि सो जाए, कुछ करे ना। घर जाने का वो उत्साह न जाने कहां डूब गया। अंदर चौके में भौरी बर्तन उठाकर रख रही थी। उसकी तत्परता देख सुषमा को और खींच आ रही थी। बक्स में कपड़े भरकर उसने वहीं कमरे के बीचों बीच छोड़ दिया। उसकी समझ में नहीं आ रहा था कि खाली 3-4 घंटे कैसे बिताए। अगर नील होता तो वो समय सहज ही कट जाता। सुषमा ने इस विचार को जन्मते ही कुचल डाला। नील से मुझे क्या, वो मेरा कौन है? पर उसकी खुली बाहों में हल्की सी सरसराहट हुई और बढ़ती बढ़ती उसके सारे शरीर में व्याप गई। सुषमा पलंग पर आंधी जा गिरी। उसने नरम तकिए में मुंह गड़ा लिया और फिर अपने दांतों से होंठ काट लिए और वैसी ही निश्चल पड़ी रही।
I was just listening to both of you, and I've been thinking that maybe we should do more audio books, because when you just hear some of these books, they just come across so beautifully, especially in their language. I wanted to, I think we have very little time left, but I just wanted some last comments from you, Daisy, from you about the importance of translations and reading them, and Mita, from you, just any thoughts about it, because you have so much to talk about this book. And I do want to tell you that I was talking to some really young person, and they said, oh my God, you're talking to Mita Vashisht. My mother always talks about her as Sushma, and we don't even what was the name of that actor, but everybody only talks about him as Neil. So, you know, any last comments, Daisy? And
so about translation.
Yeah. Why should we read more translations in India?
Well, everyone, not just Indians, should be reading more translations. Translation opens up the world to you, and you. One of my favorite things about translation is that often you're reading something that was not written for you, and so sometimes it makes it a little bit harder to read because it's not written in exactly the kind of language that you speak and written at exactly the era in which you're living. You have to make a little jump. The translator did most of the work for you, but you still have to jump into the spirit and think about a different way that people express themselves, how they live their lives. And that connects back to this book being dated, you know, that this is a window into a particular time that you may not be familiar with if you're a young person. I think translation it's like, especially in our COVID times, it's also a way for us to travel outside of ourselves and really inhabit a different world that's not created by Hollywood or Bollywood.
Yes, and we do hope that more people will read. So last comments from Sushma, Mita. Was it your bell? It just reminded me of...
It's all right. It's my...
The bell is a thing in the book, right? The bell is a thing. Okay. Your comments.
Yeah, well, I think translations are really, really important because I think they allow, you know, the act of reading is so important. And if we can actually, through translations, access our inner spaces, by reading literature of all kinds, we may or may not relate to, but at least we know we relate to it or we don't. It allows us to constantly reconnect and re-look at ourselves when you read other literature. And only translation, all good translation like Daisy's done with this one, allows you to actually to revisit another time, another space, but also I wouldn't even call this another time and space, because I still feel Pachpan Khambe is very, very contemporary as far as the spirit of the woman goes, But I think it allows, translations are very important, especially in today's time, because it's the only way we can stay in touch with the soul self, of other people, ourselves. And reading, there's nothing like reading, really. I think this idea of the audiobooks is fantastic, because the two ideas of just reading or listening, these are the two things that allow you to deeply connect to yourself, Movies, are always somebody's point of view again, but it's reading a book and being able to read something in translation actually allows you to traverse a whole inner landscape with your own sense of self, So
movies are the directors. Sorry, go ahead, complete.
So yeah, movies, a director will have a certain, point of view, which very often he will cull in a certain way so that you see it in a certain way. I mean, you can't fight with all directors and get your way,
I was just going to say that. I was going to say movies are a director's point of view unless they find Mita Vashisht to fight for the character.
I really have to thank my director of Pachpan Khambe for actually letting me do it my way, in many ways.
Yeah.
So hats off to him. But yes, translation and, reading, I think it's the journeys we can begin to take inside and get away from this business of, I think it's fantastic we are here connecting on Zoom, but it shouldn't just zoom us out in our lives, where everybody's.
No, that is brilliant. But, so a literary work keeps getting interpreted and reinterpreted, right? And the mediums can be anything, right? It can be music, drama, theater, celluloid, or just audiobooks, etc. But I just do hope that a lot of people will read this book. It's a beautiful book. It's small. It's fun. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us.
I wanted to say one quick
thing,
Shinjini.
Please.
I actually find that when you read something in a language you understand and then you try and look at the other language, very often if you try reading that language without even understanding it, if the alphabet allows you to, you actually discover amazing things through the sound of that language.
Yes.
For example, in my play on Laal Deewaarein, I have 3 languages. I have Hindi, English, and Kashmiri. And I felt you can't remove the Kashmiri from it, because when you actually get into the rhythm of Kashmiri, even if you don't understand the language, you actually understand what the cadence has to be in English or in Hindi.
It relates to you, right?
So language is so deeply personal, and if one language allows you to actually want to look at another language, that's a great thing about translation.
Yeah, and I would like to say that this book is not written in difficult Hindi. So for people that feel like, I know there's a lot of people who feel like their Hindi is too rusty and they stopped studying Hindi at a certain age.
Yes.
This is a great book to go back in.
Absolutely.
And with the translation, you have like a safety net. You can go back and forth between the two, and you don't need a dictionary. Or anything.
Absolutely. No, that's fabulous. Truly.
Yes. And let's hope, and let's hope that because of the sessions, because of listening to both of you, more people will read and discover the joy of this book. And that just makes us very happy. Thank you so much. We'll continue the conversation. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure meeting you, Daisy. Pleasure, everybody at Jaipur Lit Fest.
JLF.
Thank you.
Thanks,
JLF. Thanks. Thanks, Shinjini. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Mita. Thanks, Daisy. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Thank you, Daisy, Mita, and Shinjini for that fabulous session. I know I'm tempted to immediately buy a copy of the book and read it. Thank you all for being a great audience. On behalf of all of us, please do stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you here on the 26th of August, same time. Good night.